Chicago, 1931. The most feared gangster in America, a man who ruled speakeasies, brothels, and bootleg beer with blood and bribes, finally stood in a courtroom. But it wasn't bullets or gang wars that brought him down. It wasn't even the infamous St. Valentine's Day massacre. His empire collapsed over something far more ordinary: taxes. The world expected a mobster's bloody downfall, yet what followed was a story of patience, paper trails, and a quiet team of investigators who proved that even Al Capone could not escape the numbers. Before the name Al Capone became synonymous with gangland terror, he was just a kid from Brooklyn. Born to Italian immigrants in 1899, he grew up in crowded tenements, the son of a barber and a seamstress. The streets taught him more than school ever did: how to fight, how to hustle, and how to survive in a city that often chewed up families like his. By 17, he bore the scar that would define his face and his reputation, earned in a brawl that gave him the nickname Scarface. But in the shadows of Prohibition, survival turned into opportunity. When America outlawed alcohol in 1920, a new kind of economy was born. For most, it meant dry bars and shuttered breweries. For Capone, it meant rivers of untaxed cash. He moved west to Chicago, where the streets pulsed with speakeasies, hidden breweries, and crooked politicians. By his mid-20s, he wasn't just another hustler. He was the boss of an empire worth millions. Capone projected charm in public, handing out Christmas turkeys to poor families and laughing with reporters who called him the Robin Hood of Chicago. But beneath the tailored suits and wide grin lay something darker: extortion, violence, and a network of fear that kept rivals in line. The city became his kingdom, and with every raid that failed, with every witness that vanished, his legend grew stronger. Yet for all his power, there was one enemy he could never intimidate. Not a rival gang, not a police squad, but something invisible, patient, and unrelenting. Capone had mastered the streets, but he was about to face a battle fought in ledgers, receipts, and the relentless logic of the law. By the mid-1920s, Chicago belonged to Al Capone. His bootlegging empire flooded the city with beer and whiskey. His gambling halls ran nonstop. Politicians, judges, and police chiefs accepted envelopes of cash, ensuring that when Capone walked the streets in his diamond-pinned fedora, he did so untouched. Rival gangs feared him, the public half admired him, and the law seemed powerless. But then came the blood. On February 14, 1929, 7 men were lined against a garage wall and cut down in a hail of machine gun fire, the St. Valentine's Day massacre. The killings shocked the nation, cementing Capone as the face of organized crime. Newspapers screamed his name, demanding justice. Yet when investigators closed in, they found no usable witnesses, no willing informants, no fingerprints that could stick. Capone seemed invincible. Behind the headlines, however, a different kind of strategy was taking shape. In Washington, the U.S. Treasury's Bureau of Internal Revenue asked a simple question. If Capone was truly making millions, why were there no tax returns in his name? That question fell into the hands of Special Agent Frank J. Wilson, a quiet accountant with a sharp eye for numbers. Wilson and his small team began digging through the debris of Capone's empire. Not guns, not blood, but paper. They scoured Western Union records, bank slips, and cashier's chits. The mafia boss who had outgunned the police was suddenly vulnerable to receipts. And then, a breakthrough. A ledger from a gambling hall in Cicero with initials, columns of profits, and payouts that whispered Capone's name. Still, paper alone wasn't enough. They needed a witness, but the man who kept the books, Leslie Shumway, had vanished. For months, agents chased rumors across the country until finally, in a quiet corner of Florida, they found him. Shumway was terrified. He knew what Capone's men did to traitors, yet under federal protection he agreed to testify. As investigators built their case, Capone seemed to sense the walls closing in. He tried to polish his image, donating to charities, courting reporters, and boasting that he was just a businessman meeting the demands of thirsty citizens. But his spending betrayed him. Luxury mansions in Miami, custom-tailored suits, even extravagant grocery bills. All of it pointed to vast income, and none of it reported. The government began stacking charges. 5 years of unpaid taxes, hundreds of thousands owed. Capone's lawyers tried to negotiate a plea deal for a short sentence, but the judge rejected it outright. Rumors of jury tampering swirled. On the morning of the trial, the judge ordered the entire jury swapped with another courtroom's panel to prevent corruption. Capone, who had once ruled Chicago like a king, now faced the terrifying possibility that for the first time in his life, money and muscle wouldn't save him. And the men who hunted him didn't need a massacre or a smoking gun. They needed something far simpler, numbers that added up to guilt. October 1931. The trial of Al Capone became the spectacle of the decade. Crowds lined the courthouse steps, desperate for a glimpse of the man who had ruled Chicago with bullets and bribes. Inside, Capone wore his trademark smile, a silk suit, and the swagger of a man who believed he could outplay the system once again. But this time, the battlefield wasn't the streets, it was the ledger. Witness after witness stepped forward. Clerks, cashiers, even the vanished bookkeeper, Leslie Shumway, now under federal protection. Each pointed back to the numbers. The ledgers showed profits, initials, and payouts. The spending habits, lavish parties, custom suits, real estate, told the story of untaxed millions. Capone's lawyers fought to spin the evidence, calling it circumstantial, dismissing the ledger as hearsay. But jurors weren't seeing the feared gangster of legend. They were seeing a man cornered by arithmetic. Every page turned, every figure cited, stripped away the myth of untouchability. And then came the moment that sealed his fate, the jury swap. Fearing bribery and intimidation, Judge James H. Wilkerson replaced the entire panel with one from another case, ordinary citizens suddenly tasked with deciding the fate of the most powerful mobster in America. Capone's grin faltered. For the first time, he faced a fight his money couldn't buy. On October 17, 1931, the verdict was read. Guilty on 5 counts of tax evasion. The courtroom erupted. Capone slumped in his chair, the weight of 11 years in federal prison bearing down on him. The empire built on blood and fear had crumbled, not from bullets but from balance sheets. And yet the story wasn't over. Because what happened after his sentencing was as haunting as his rise. Stick with me, because the final act reveals just how far the mighty can fall. If you're gripped by this moment, don't look away now. The ending will leave you stunned. Like, share, and stay tuned, because you won't believe how Capone's empire truly ended. Capone's sentencing marked the end of an era. 11 years behind bars, longer than any tax sentence handed down at the time, was a crushing blow to the man once called untouchable. At first, he was sent to a federal prison in Atlanta, where he tried to buy influence with guards and fellow inmates. But in 1934, the government moved him to America's newest fortress of isolation, Alcatraz. There, the gangster who once commanded armies of men was reduced to an inmate number. Stripped of power, forced to shuffle through steel corridors under the watch of guards who could not be bribed. His health, already fragile, deteriorated rapidly. Syphilis eroded his mind, leaving him confused and broken. By the time he was released in 1939, he was no longer the iron-fisted king of Chicago. He spent his final years in Florida, a ghost of the man who once terrified a city. The empire he built collapsed quickly. Without its leader, rival gangs carved up territory, and the myth of invincibility vanished. But what remained was the lesson of his downfall. It wasn't Elliot Ness smashing barrels of beer that toppled Capone. It wasn't gangland assassinations or police raids. It was the patient work of accountants, the discipline of investigators, who believed that even the most powerful criminal could be undone by numbers on a page. The story of Al Capone is more than the fall of one gangster. It's a reminder that no one, no matter how rich, feared, or celebrated, is beyond accountability. The law can wait. The truth can hide in plain sight. But eventually the books must balance. So the question is, if numbers can topple the most feared gangster in America, what hidden truths could they uncover in our world today? If this story left you stunned, hit that like button, share it with someone who loves history, and subscribe for more untold stories where the smallest details change the course of history.